We're sitting here with Hoon Kim, Director of the Captive Nations Coalition of the Committee on Present-Endangered China. We're going to be talking about the Chinese Communist Party's abusive policies towards other countries. Hoon Kim, it's a real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thank you.
Now, you've been working on this coalition of these captive peoples of China. Tell us how this works or what you're working on.
So the Captive Nations Coalition, or the CNC, as with its own acronym, it's made up of folks that have been taken over and were specifically oppressed by the Chinese Communist Party over the last 70 years, I would say, since its founding. So we represent those who are in the United States as well as those who are outside of the United States, trying to get their voices heard to the international world.
Now, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo actually tweeted out a photo with some of you folks on there talking about this, actually. And it was interesting to see because this is a very different way of presenting the human rights abuses of the Chinese Communist Party, because we know that they invaded Tibet and they invaded Hong Kong now as well.
Right.
And they invaded, for example, southern Mongolia, Inner Mongolia. And we see now that these are kind of isolated incidents. The idea of uniting them under one issue is a very unique stance. Now, I'm curious, how did this coalition come together?
Well, the coalition came together, I would say, since the foundation of the CCP itself. It never was really united, to a point that it is today strategically. And what I mean by strategically is that, since we have this blessings of technology and the fact that there is a closer community awareness now, for example, with what's happening to the people of East Turkestan, or what is known as the Uyghur issue, people are becoming a lot more aware in that regard. So in terms of the general awareness, in terms of the general information that's out there, these communities are a lot more united than ever before, and they have the need to do that. Every single one of these communities have now come to realize that if we do not unite and do something in order to get our voices heard, we are going to be silenced forever. So with all of that together is how this coalition came about. And the Committee on Present-Endangered China decided this is the platform that we need to provide to the folks from these captive nations so that not only their voices can be heard, but a realistic action can be taken in order to ensure that there is true freedom that they'll be enjoyed in the future. So,
I'm curious, when it comes to the CCP, its agendas, and what this represents. You said this is the most important issue with China right now, one of the most important. And it's something important for the world as well. Why do you say it's important for the world, this issue?
Well, it is important for the world because, one of the things that the CCP does historically, they have done, I should say, is that every single place that they have taken over, per se, other than different parts of China. And I would even add that the Chinese people have been the first victims of the Chinese Communist Party. After they were done with them, they moved on to take over these other nations that were once independent and free. And they have tested out their oppression. Specifically, we see today slave labor, which is rampant, and which has unfortunately have driven the Chinese economy for a very, very long time. It's still going on today. And what is happening to the Uyghurs, for example, and Kazakhs and all the other Turkic people in what is known as Xinjiang. The mass surveillance system, for example, that's being exported all over the world. So if you look at it from that degree, you can't help but to wonder, is this going to reach our shores one day? And is this going to be affecting me and my family one day? And what will be the consequences that we have to pay at that time? And it scares you. And it scares you because all of these things that we thought were once a foreign issue will become a reality for us one day. So that is why I say it's one of the most important things, because this is a threat to literally every single one of us right now. And one of the things that the Captive Nations Coalition aims to do is to also provide a voice to all those individuals from the Belt and Road Initiative countries. As you know, the Belt and Road Initiative is what is known as a neo-colonialism effort by the CCP. And once they take over these areas after a series of episodes of countries not being able to pay back these massive loans that the CCP has given to them, or a takeover of a land because of a historical claim, like what's happening in Tajikistan, for example, right now. It serves as an example a lot more at that time, because now we see their expansion becoming a reality to sovereign nations. So by engaging with the captive nations, we want to also let the world know that as these countries were taken over in the past, when they were once free and independent, this could become a reality for all countries in the globe, and that is pretty scary.
I've actually spoken, of course, at different events and so on, and sometimes I get Chinese people, CCP type people coming up to me and saying, "Oh, how dare you criticize the Chinese Communist Party?" And one of the narratives they'll say is, didn't America invade Iraq as an excuse of why the CCP invaded, for example, Tibet?
Right.
And, oh, didn't America have colonialism? Didn't the West? Why can't the Chinese Communist Party have it? They try to create this equivalency,
right,
of course, in their narratives. What would you say to that?
Well, look, the United States and rest of the rest of the free world isn't innocent, isn't perfect. China's not perfect, right? And we clearly realize that. But the difference between not just the United States itself, but the difference between the free world and the Chinese Communist Party run China is that in the free world, at least we can hold ourselves accountable. For example, the Japanese internment, that was wrong. Slavery, that was wrong. But I can say that it is wrong because systematically I was taught about what had happened. And my teachers, I remember my fourth grade teacher, giving us a book assignment on the Japanese internment camps, and said, these were human beings, American citizens, many of them patriotic American citizens that were taken away in these internment camps, and we have to make sure that something like this never repeats again. You have that kind of accountability system, and thank God we do, right? And the Iraq War, look, a lot of people have given their analysis to it, right? Now a lot of us realize that there was a lot more troubling factors about it than we realized in the past, right? But why do we have that system? Why do we have an opportunity to say that something was wrong and something was not wrong? It's because we have a system where we can at least correct ourselves, and that is how democracy runs, because human beings are inherently imperfect. Now let's look at a system run by the Chinese Communist Party. Do you also notice how every single one of their arguments have a reason behind it? Well, we invaded Tibet, they'll say, because it was a feudal system that was run by some Lama dictatorship, and we freed them. They'll have the same arguments for Southern Mongolia and what they began to call Xinjiang or East Turkestan. They said these people were backwards, these people were uneducated, but we went in there and saved the day. That sounds a lot like the KKK, for example, saying, well, gosh darn, we brought these minorities, we gave them education, we gave them all these great benefits in this country, and that's why, everyone's enjoying what they're enjoying today. When in reality, it doesn't matter what race or background you're from. As Americans, we have the ability to build a better world here by holding ourselves accountable always. But for the Chinese Communist Party, I have not seen a single factor where that was applied in their system. And so that would be the narrative that I would provide. And that is probably the best narrative that these CCP sympathizers can hear.
Now, I know one of the narratives I've heard tossed around, and including, in fact, by even some Western journalists and academics, is they say, oh, well, China uplifted the Chinese people out of poverty.
Right.
They try to say, the Chinese Communist Party says, there'd be no new China without the CCP. That's one of their slogans. And I've been shocked to see how many Western academics and journalists pick that up and actually believe it.
Sure.
I'm curious, though, based on, because I know you've spoken to all these people as well, how do you often explain that? How do you talk about that?
Well, firstly, in terms of prosperity, we need to define what prosperity means. Does prosperity just mean money? And in that case, yeah, China would technically fall under that, successful nation. But that's really not the reality, is it? Right? The wealth of China, I'm sure the CCP had a role in it, but in a genuine sense, it was the Chinese people that made it into a reality. Right? When you have an open market system, human beings, no matter what you are, will take advantage of that, right, to make yourself grow, individual growth, as some may call it, right? That concept was transported into China, and the Chinese people said, you know what, I'm going to take part in that. And a large portion of the Chinese economy grew because of the Chinese people doing that, not because some government official in the CCP, giving them all the directives on what to do. One thing that Deng Xiaoping did well is not doing anything. He didn't do anything. He just let the economy grow, right? Going back to these academics, right? Unfortunately, we had academic freedom, independence in this country up until, I would say, maybe even 10 years ago. But when universities started to rely heavily on the Chinese students' tuitions, and I would even say there's also a factor of cancel culture where professors want to just pretty much criticize the U.S. as much as possible, but also at the same time interpret that as, well, in order to do that successfully, I need to praise a system that's other than the United States. I personally have seen that on some of the professors that I've had in the past. They would praise the Chinese Communist Party, they would even say, well, despite the human rights conditions, they've done so well. But they said, well, when it comes to human rights, well, we can talk about that later. It's terrible, but that's every country has a bad human rights record. So they'll be extremely dismissive of it.
In terms of your coalition, based on what could happen, and based on why you do the work you're doing, if you were to tell people one thing about the importance of this kind of drawing the line with the CCP,
sure,
and what is at risk in terms of that as well if it fails, what would you tell them?
Well, failure to me is not an option. But if it does happen, I think all of us would agree that the least that we want to do is to tell each other that at least we gave it our best. But the sad part about your question is that could only happen if the world does not wake up to the threats of the CCP. And at the end of the day, it's up to the individuals in this country to firstly come to awareness of that threat and act in accordance to what they think is the most appropriate thing to do, and in the best of their abilities. As long as that determination is alive, I don't think defeat will ever really happen. Even just mentioning the Chinese people themselves, this flaming fire for freedom and democracy that many of dissidents and just even the rest of the Chinese people who genuinely want it, defeat will not come as long as that fire is alive. And that has been demonstrated throughout the years since the founding of the CCP. I mean, look at what the Falun Gong practitioners are doing, for example, right? Let's set aside everything for a second. Despite the limited resources, despite the attacks that they're getting constantly as an evil cult or some other vilifying terms, they've done an amazing job in terms of protecting who they are, but also going beyond that and saying that China can be better, and that we need to let the world know that the CCP is an evil monster. The Chinese Christians, they're paying their price, with arrests, torture, a lot of times executions, organ harvesting, Despite all that, the Chinese people and the members of these captive nations have put up a fight. So I don't think any of them are looking into defeat, but the more that this fire is raging on, the closer to victory we are. And that's our primary focus, so that one day the restoration of their independence and freedom can be achieved. And as long as that is also alive, the term defeat will never apply to any of them. I can assure you of that.